but like some of them are like food labels. What you can and can't say on food labels, like you can literally say this is natural, and there's nothing that clearly defines what natural is anymore. Even though, like, when you look at the truth clearly defines what natural is, but on a food label, that doesn't mean the same. Or if something says sugar-free, it could say sugar-free, but, and I mentioned this in my book, there's over 48 different names for sugar. And so quite often when you're looking at the sugar content, you don't even know if that's a true sugar content because there's so many different names for sugar. So food labels are one myth that people live by, because when they go into supermarkets, they're often looking for those like exaggerated claims on food labels that say things like natural and, you know, all organic and all these sorts of things. But many of them, if they're not backed by an agency, or they don't actually have a defined or regulated sort of definition, many of them mean absolutely nothing. So that's one myth that I'm always like trying to break down with my audience and help them understand food labels a little bit better, because I think that's where we get in the most trouble. So that's one myth. Myth that most people hear but is actually true is that medical error is actually a leading cause of death in America. And that's actually a truth. It's actually the third leading cause of all Americans. There's two different sort of studies you can look at. There's one by Johns Hopkins that estimates that 250,000 people every year die of medical error. There's another study that's a little bit more independent that has those numbers as high as 440. So that's like the population of Miami every year dying as a result of medical error. And medical error, just to give people sort of a definition of what that is that's an unintended cause or outcome as a result of healthcare, okay? And in many cases, this can mean that they got the right drug, the right dose, or the right surgery on the right limb, and they still died as a result of that. So a lot of people sort of like think when I say medical error, they're thinking like, well, they must have did something awfully wrong. Well, that's included in there, but it also includes like they did exactly what they were taught to do as a medical health professional, and the patient died as a result of their care. It also includes things like hospital acquired infection as well. That means that you went into the hospital, and as a result of being in the hospital, you got an infection as a result of the instruments that they use, as a result of the equipment, as a result of the healthcare worker. About 1.1 million people get hospital-acquired infections every year. And unfortunately, a lot of them also pass as a result of that, because you have to understand, when you're in the hospital, guess what? You're sick. If you're sick, in many cases, you're also going to be immune compromised. And especially if you're getting a surgery, now your body is open up and exposed to getting that infection directly into the body. So there's a long list, unfortunately, of myths, lies, and truths behind modern food and medicine. And that's essentially why I gave that subtitle to my book, is because, you know, in my opinion, I really think that most people don't really know what's going on in healthcare, the food industry, and big pharma. And so I try to sort of speak to a lot of those myths and lies and truths that people are very much unaware of, but unfortunately, that unawareness or that lack of consciousness about, you know, what we believe about certain agencies, what we believe about, you know, healthcare, what we believe about the food industry. Unfortunately, they're not in alignment with our greatest, you know, source of health or overall health.
Since you first started thinking about this and realizing these truths and having to reconcile your beliefs with them, have you seen things change at all? Do you feel like things are going in the better direction, or worse, or the same?
I honestly don't know. You know, like, and I say that because on one perspective, I'm a little bit out of the loop. Like, I don't eat at McDonald's and places like that, but like sometimes I get off the exit and I see somebody turn into a McDonald's, and I'm like, wow, like people still eat that. So on one level, in my mind, I'm thinking like nobody eats McDonald's anymore. But then I go to the hospital and I see this one inside of the hospital. So on one level, no, I don't think it's getting better at all. And in many levels, I think it's actually getting worse, unfortunately, because we're so far away from the truth. And what I mean by that is, even when you think about this pandemic that we've been going through, for the last 8 or 9 months, we've been told to shelter in place, wear a mask, and wash our hands, which nothing is wrong with that. But the only issue is nobody's had a conversation about what you really need to do is build up your immune system and get healthier. Because even in the case where you wear a mask, wash your hands, and shelter in place, I've still seen people get COVID. I've still seen people get infected. And that mask, washing their hands, and sheltering in place will do nothing for you once you have COVID. And so the real conversation has to be about our health and how do we improve and advance our health? Because unfortunately, and I talk about this in our book, America is actually the sickest and the most obese country that's ever been in existence. I mean, in the entire existence of human evolution, we are the sickest and we are the most obese. And with that being said, we're going to be the most immune compromised. So unfortunately, I don't think things have changed because we haven't shifted the conversation to what is the real cause. It's just like with medicine. Medicine is manipulating our biochemistry, it's not improving our biochemistry. So just because you turn off the check engine light doesn't mean that you don't still need an oil change. And that's essentially what medications are doing. They're turning off the check engine light, but it's not actually addressing the real issue. And so because I believe that we're not addressing the real issues, unfortunately, I don't believe that there's much change. It doesn't matter that people are saying, oh, we're coming out with these life-saving genetic drugs that can alter your genes. Well, the thing about nature is if you give a drug and it alters your genes, guess what? If your environment, meaning what you eat, the stress you put in your body, the lack of exercise, the lack of sunlight, the lack of enough water, that will always trump any drug. It's not capable of trumping poor behavior. And so because we're so far away from real conversations, I just don't believe that, unfortunately, in many cases, we're not getting better. Now, there are people who are making the switch to eating healthier things, living a healthier lifestyle. But, I always get that reminder, like I said, when I either go in the hospital or I'm getting off the exit and I see a doctor at a hospital walk into a McDonald's, or I just see somebody turn into a McDonald's. I'm thinking to myself, like, my God, there's still a lot of work to do. So, yeah.
I know. I think also once you start changing your lifestyle and your diet, you, like you said, you get so self-absorbed. Obviously, we all are all the time, that your perspective, you just sort of assume other people kind of have or must get. And it takes being face to face with them being people that don't, you're like shocked,
Yep.
And you realize the more and more you do that you're kind of, like you said, you're holding on to this holy grail, this truth. And you're sort of like, I don't want to be an evangelist. I don't want to be annoying, but also like, I have something to tell you.
Right. It's such a balance.
Yeah. So I mean, I totally get why you're doing everything that you're doing based on what you've seen. Cause you're like, I just can't keep this to myself. I love the analogy you made for describing what medications do, and like turning off the check engine light doesn't mean you don't need an oil change. I just thought that was perfect. So I want to ask you a couple of questions wearing your pharmacist hat. What are some of the best ways to protect yourself from the medical error that you're describing as a patient? I know myself, being a holistic patient advocate, I have things that I've recommended to people, but I'd love to hear your perspective since you're, on the side of potentially giving somebody a medical error, right?
Yeah. I always say the first and best thing you can do is educate yourself. Don't walk into any situation with any professional without first educating yourself, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to ask questions. You can only ask questions when you have a perspective. You can only have a perspective when you have information. So never walk into a situation without first getting some perspective yourself. Because the first thing that happens is people are confused about what's going on in their bodies. And quite often, like, healthcare professionals don't do a very good job of explaining what exactly is happening. And so when the options are presented, they're going to be presented in such a way that it seems like it's either A or B. And in many cases, A is take this drug, or B, suffer. It's really not anything in between. Unfortunately, most healthcare professionals aren't going to give you any holistic advice. And most of the time, people are going to want to take a natural route in their brain, or want to take the route where they can fix themselves. But that is not the information that you're going to get, unfortunately, from a healthcare professional, because they don't teach us that. They don't teach us how to teach you self-care. Okay. So you got to become an educated advocate for yourself first.